Good morning, everyone, and welcome for today's session, today's webinar on AI Jargon, which is an 8-part AI webinar series. And my name is Aarti Chauhan, and I manage the software donation program here at Nasscom Foundation. Before we begin, I would like to quickly run through a few housekeeping points. This webinar is being recorded, and the link of the recording will be available on the Nasscom Foundation YouTube page. All participants are currently on mute to avoid background noise. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box or use the Q&A feature. We'll address them during the session or at the end. If you are on Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and the video of the webinar. So if possible, please close all other programs to help you have the best experience. So now I would like to give an overview about the Nasscom Foundation and the NGO empowerment. We, Nasscom Foundation, are the only not-for-profit entity representing the tech industry and working for over more than 20 years in tech for good. We have a strong nationwide presence to facilitate the last mile impact. Few of our programs are powered by Tech for Good, which are digital literacy, skilling and employability, women entrepreneurship, NGO empowerment, and social innovation for youth. Under NGO empowerment, we are strengthening the social ecosystem by leveraging technology to create a resilient and self-sufficient NGO sector that can effectively address societal challenges and drive positive change in communities across India. We are running 3 programs under NGO empowerment: Big Tech, My Kartavya, and Capacity Building Program. Now, I'm very excited to introduce you our 8-part AI webinar series designed specifically to help you explore and apply AI in your work. This series begins with 2 foundational sessions that simplify key AI concepts and build your understanding from the ground up. This is followed by 6 practical hands-on sessions where you will learn how to use tools like Google Gemini to solve real-world problems. What makes this series unique is that it's completely beginner friendly, so no prior AI knowledge is required. It will help you make informed decisions and adopt AI, while also giving you the opportunity to learn alongside your peers and industry experts. So with that, I would like to welcome our speaker of the day, Chet, who is a non-profit consultant with over 10 years of experience in developing tailored digital transformation roadmaps and capacity building programs to enable for small to medium organizations to leverage tech for good. Over to you, Chet, and welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Artie, and thanks, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Well, the first part of a very fruitful 8-part series, and I'm very excited to actually host you today and the next weeks moving forward. First and foremost, let me share my screen. And one thing I noticed is that the share screen is precariously right beside the end event button. So I'm going to be very careful there. So, all right, I hope you can all see my screen. So hey guys, again, as already mentioned, welcome to the AI Jargon Demystified session, where our intention for today is really, let's pull the curtain back, let's make things simple, and let's define AI in plain English, right? So, but before that, a quick bit about me and the organization that I represent. So, I represent an organization called TechSoup. We have been a long-time partner of Nasscom in supporting the Big Tech Foundation program, the Big Tech program, and many other projects. One other thing is that part of a larger project. It's called the APAC AI Learning Community. It's a collaboration between Nasscom, TechSoup, and Info Exchange, our partners in Australia and New Zealand. If you want more content, services, and any other coaching support related to AI, you are 100% welcome to join this free community. All right. So enough about that. Sorry, quick thing about me. The only important part here is I am a real person. I already gave a lovely introduction. I am not AI generated. I'm not deepfake. If you pinch me, I will cry. So that's the only important part here. So let's move forward. So about today's topic, we want to talk about AI. Particularly, let's face it head on. And let's call it what it is. It is getting too overwhelming, right? Because the reality of the matter is, AI historically has been a topic mostly for people within that specific sector, within that specific field of expertise. But the challenge is when AI became increasingly accessible, particularly for day to day consumers like us, suddenly we're facing terms like, oh, large language models, like thought models, and so on and so forth. And we have to deal with that. We have to deal with a whole host of history, concepts, jargons we weren't really trained to manage. But we need to understand these so that we are able to understand the risks, the opportunities, and most importantly, just learn what exactly we were dealing with. Because AI, more and more now, whether intentionally or unintentionally, is becoming part of our day to day work and personal lives, right? That being said, the idea here is let's unpack AI. Let's simplify this concept and the other foundational concepts that comprise it so that you're able to understand what you're dealing with and make educated decisions in adopting it, whether it's for your personal life or your for work life, right? So exactly how are we going to do that? Well, we were thinking of ways to essentially navigate this topic in a more creative way. And we realized, well, hang on, there is a process that we can all kind of like agree with, or at least all have undergone. So it's very familiar. Because AI is now being used by different offices, different organizations. Why not use a method we're all familiar with? And that is a job interview. In reality, as we approach AI, we're not approaching it as technology, as a piece of technology anymore. We're approaching it as an answer to different roles, different gaps within our organization, almost no different to when you're hiring a new person. That being said, throughout the next few moments, what we'll do is we'll interview AI so that we understand where it came from, how its thought process works, and how it is best that we can deal with it and work with it moving forward. So, that being said, let's kick things off. Let's paint the picture. This is a picture that not a lot of us would find very unusual. I think it's something very common for us nonprofits. It's that, for example, you are finding yourself in one of those weeks. Tasks are overdue, reports are piling in, every other Wednesday for us nonprofits. And the problem is that your team needs help fast because deadlines are coming very, very quickly. On top of that, you're a lean team, so you all wear many hats, but at the same time, you need people who are as versatile as you that, needs less supervision, is a team player, and most importantly, is able to take on whatever task you're going to give them with little to no onboarding. It's a dream applicant, right? Lo and behold, somebody does do it. Somebody does apply. For this session, we'll call her Jenny. Jenny is the perfect candidate. So, why is that so? Jenny is multi talented. She is able to do creative work, to data analysis, and even research. And hey, she can even code. Perfect, right? Aside of that, she's had diverse experiences across different sectors, something we from the nonprofit sector would actually really appreciate, right? She's worked with nonprofits, government agencies, commercial sector. She has a very nuanced approach to different tasks and also different cultures. And finally, she's a humble veteran. With a CV as rich as hers, she's still open to feedback. She doesn't mind menial tasks such as, hey, organize the spreadsheet, or something even as complex as, hey, what are your thoughts on the geopolitics right now of, say, uh, like the issue, say, with the Strait of Hormuz, right? She's able to do it all. So, really, a unicorn of an applicant. And if you haven't caught on yet, Jenny it will be our stand-in for Gen AI. The way we want to approach Jenny moving forward is let's call her in for an interview. She sounds like a very good candidate. She has it all, but let's get to know more about her, such as her background, her thought process, and her strengths and weaknesses. And in terms of AI, let's understand okay, how is AI able to do all of what we're asking AI? How does that work? When you send a task, how does your prompt turn into an output? And most importantly, what are the gaps that we need to be aware of, and what are the opportunities where we can apply AI safely? So this is how we're going to approach or interview with Jenny moving forward, right? And Jenny, again, Gen AI. So let's proceed. Part one is let's get to know Jenny. Let's call her in. And naturally, as part of any job interview, probably one of the first things you'll ask is, okay, talk to me about your experiences. Talk to me about your educational background, your say your what's this job profile, job history, and so on. So let's unpack that. For Jenny or Gen AI, she also has some level of educational background. So historically, Jenny comes from an umbrella concept called artificial intelligence, you know. So Gen AI, generative AI, is part of that larger umbrella. Artificial intelligence is really taking technology and allowing it to mimic human intelligence. But Jed, what does human intelligence in this concept or under this discussion means? Well, it's based on three key mental tasks that any piece of artificial intelligence can perform. First, if you give Gen AI data, it can learn that data. Second is coming from this sets of data, it can start making inferences. For example, if you give Jenny a sequence of numbers, she will be able to find a pattern in those numbers. If you remove some of those numbers, she would be able to correctly guess what would be the numbers that are missing because, again, of her ability to infer patterns or derive patterns from this data set. And most importantly, the last mental concept that artificial intelligence mimics is the ability to reason. She's not only giving you straight answers, instead, she's also able to explain why that is missing. For example, let's go back to that number sequence. If, say, you give Jenny multiples of 7 and you take out the third part, well, she'd be able to say, oh, Jed, the answer there is 21 because the sequence you've given me is multiples of 7 and it's 7 times 3 is 21. She would be able to give you proper reasoning behind her response. So, in short, artificial intelligence as a concept is any piece of technology that is able to achieve these three key mental tasks, much like us humans, can learn data, make inferences based on that data, and can create and can build reasoning if you ask uh, artificial intelligence about that data. So that is historically where Jenny came from, or at least the beginning of her training. Now, in the first few parts of Jenny's career, that was usually applied to what we refer to as structured sets of data. When we say structured sets of data that has clear sequences or clear patterns. A very good example of this, if you remember back in primary school or secondary school, when we were doing a lot of those aptitude tests, we would have those, okay, what's the next in the sequence of shapes or sequence of numbers, things like that. That's typically where Jenny's skills were applied. Very, very structured sets of data. But naturally, Jenny wanted to grow. I don't want to be limited to just, clear sets of clear patterns. She wanted to grow, and her machine learning, or what we refer to as the application of AI in structured data, it grew. It grew to now using her intelligence to more complex sets of data. That's what we refer to now as deep learning. One of the key things about deep learning is that it's so human like that it is actually very hard to describe. In a way, for example, for us, when we think of a thought, right? Sometimes it's very hard to be able to communicate where that thought process came about. How did that begin? How did we arrive at this idea, right? Similar to deep learning with machines or with AI, it's now very human like. And as it grew to deep learning, it's now able to use the same level of learning, inferring, and reasoning, but apply it in what we would refer to as unstructured sets of data that are far larger in quantity and have less structure than most typical data sets where artificial intelligence would deal with under machine learning. So, what are we referring to less structured sets of information, right? So going from here, is this evolution from basic machine learning or just dealing with basic patterns to deep learning, where Jenny is able to now leverage our history of unstructured data. When we say unstructured data or our unstructured data, think about Twitter, your public Twitter feed. That's unstructured data because there's really no pattern to your tweets. Another good example is our photos, our videos. There's no inherent or obvious pattern there. So that's where deep learning is applied now because it's now finding patterns, able to create or even identify patterns and reason behind those patterns within data sets that are not really inherently patterned or structured. Now, that being said, it's what powers Gen AI now, what makes Gen AI capable of doing the things, or at least understanding our different languages of communication and so on and so forth. But then the critical question you want to ask here is, Jed, you've mentioned data a lot. And now that Gen AI is dealing with using deep learning for unstructured data, what data exactly are you talking about, right? So that's what we want to unpack next. Data from where? Well, the internet, basically. So Jenny, much like us humans, she Googles, she finds her answers in Google. So there is a lot of publicly accessible information over the internet, and that's what she leverages more often than not. Wikipedia, your public Twitter feed, your public posts in Facebook, Instagram, government researches, publications, and so forth. Anything that isn't password or behind a paywall, she can access, and she uses that to actually inform her thought process. But outside of public internet data, she's also able to use synthetic data. Synthetic data is any data that we ask Gen AI to make up. For example, you're running tests on, uh, say you have you want to do kind of like tests for AI on an orphanage, but you don't want to give it actual records of children. Rather, you ask Gen AI, could you make me a mock set of data for about like 50 children? That's safe. That's you're not breaking any privacy issues because it's completely fictional data. That's synthetic data. It actually also learns from that. So be mindful of that. And finally, because this data is typically in, text format, this is where the concept called large language models come from. It's the foundational thinking process of Gen AI to be able to see patterns, use learning, reasoning, and inference within language texts or common or plain language and find patterns there. That's large language models. So right now, the way Jenny thinks is that she sees data in patterns. She's only looking at patterns, which is a critical thing. So let's move forward. Essentially, because Jenny thinks through patterns, the important thing to understand here is that there's really no right or wrong with how Jenny thinks. What does that mean? Okay, for example, let's step back and say 10 people are crossing the street. 9 out of 10 people cross in the wrong part. They weren't crossing in the pedestrian lane, they were crossing everywhere else, jaywalking essentially. For us, we understand that that's not right because we have an understanding of law, right? You're supposed to cross in the pedestrian lane or the zebra crossing. For Jenny, what she'll see there is the pattern. Oh, well, 9 people didn't use the pedestrian lane. So the way she's going to see that is the pattern is most people wouldn't care. So that's fine. If you can see there, the way Jenny thinks, because she thinks in patterns, she's not really applying any inherent sense of right or wrong. Rather, what she's trying to do is she's trying to create answers out of what is coming from the data patterns, or what is common, or what is likely, right? That being said, similar to humans, and I want to highlight this, Gen AI is also really just guessing. It's just that she's guessing in a very confident manner. You wouldn't know otherwise if you don't check the outputs. So I know I've rambled a lot here. So the question for you is, well, Zed, okay, that's good to know, but what should we take away from this? What is the practical application of what you're telling me about machine learning, deep learning, and large language models? Well, there are three key takeaways, and they're all largely about Gen AI or Jenny's relationship with data, because this is going to be critical as you start experimenting with tools such as ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, and so forth. First and foremost, Jenny lives on data. So as you interact with ChatGPT, Gemini, and so on, you better ask yourself, okay, what data am I giving Jenny? Or what data am I giving my AI companion? Am I giving her access to my emails? Is that safe? Do I have anything that's sensitive there? And on top of that, you also maybe want to ask, what account am I using? Is it a free personal account? Does my free personal account provide me with privacy settings where it's not going to use whatever, exchanges we have and apply that with other conversations with other people that I may not know of, right? That's where the concept of training data comes into place because whatever exchanges you have with ChatGPT or Gemini and so on, Gen AI takes that. Your partner, your AI companion takes that into account, learns from it, and may apply that learning with other exchanges, not unless you have certain privacy privileges that's part of your subscription. So, as you move forward, the first practical application that you want to think about is what data am I feeding my Gen AI companion? Is this safe? Is there anything sensitive? And am I protected? Do I have privacy settings or features accessible to my account? So, that's the first bit. The second bit is it learns from more data. You don't have to settle with whatever's accessible in Wikipedia or the public internet. There's also data that is specifically about yourself, your preferences, the way you speak, and so on and so forth. This is particularly common for more creative outputs. A very good example, I write a lot of blogs, but similar to you, who may have your own different writing styles, different voice, if you deal with Gen AI for the first time, who has no clear background of who you are, any response, any creative output response you may receive may sound too generic. That's why we now have that phrase, oh, this sounds like AI because it's far too robotic, far too rigid, far too generic. That's common, mostly because maybe we haven't provided Gen AI with a clear set of references. So, more for creative outputs, maybe ask yourself if you're experiencing this, maybe ask yourself, okay, what kind of information can I give my AI companion in a way that it can start replicating or sounding more like me? Granted, that is acceptable for you, right? It's also a question of do I want that, right? So, that being said, for example, for non sensitive contexts, I could feed AI with samples of my blogs and say, take all of these blogs, my recent, say, 10 blogs that I posted, and try to determine what is, say, my tone of voice in a way that you will understand. So, in a way that when I give you a new blog, you would be able to proofread that while maintaining my tone of voice. So, I hope that makes sense, right? You can train data. That is the concept of training data, whereas you're really just giving it information that is relevant for that specific context. And finally, it guesses. Again, Jenny has no inherent right or wrong. She only sees reality in patterns of data. That being said, whatever output she gives you is really just her best guess. She is trying her best, but that's really just the best guess. That's why it's very critical to always review the output. And that being said, this segues us to one critical component, or the second part of the session, which is working with guesses. Because now we've established that Jenny really doesn't know right or wrong, how do we deal with somebody who's guessing 100% of the time, right? Again, similar to us, we don't really know anything for certain. So, one thing that I would like you to do is I would like you to join me for a quick activity. I want to demonstrate how Jenny's thought process works, right? Let's simulate that in a very, very simple manner. So, first thing, think of two questions, right? Just at the top of your head, think of two questions. Think first of a very, very simple question. Maybe I'll give you an example. And when I say simple question, something that you can easily Google. For example, what is the weather tomorrow? Or what is 2 plus 2, right? Something as simple as that. Set that aside. Now think of a second question. Sorry. The second question is think of a hyper specific question. For example, and when we say hyper specific, something that is more complicated to Google. The example I would always give is say, what is the philosophical meaning behind Lord of the Rings and how does that apply to, say, World War II? Right? Because, J.R.R. Tolkien lived through the World War. So think of something as complex and overloaded as that question. Set that question aside. Now, what we want to do is join me and grab your mobile, or if you have your laptop open, open a new tab, go to google.com, and we want to type those questions one by one. And I want you to observe the first thing that I want you to do is type the first question, the simple one, but slowly. For example, type it one word at a time and try to observe what comes out of the auto reply or at least the autofill settings. So let's do that. Let me open my browser. For example, my question is what is the weather on Saturday in Manila? What is the weather on Saturday in Now, as I'm observing, eventually the closer I get to the end of the sentence, the more accurate the auto reply or the autofill is, right? So eventually you'll get there, Manila, Philippines. And there, I got it. Now let's go back. Let's now do that same process, but with a more complicated question. For example, say for me, what is the cultural impact of pineapples on pizza for Italian Americans? Let's try to type that and let's see whether Google can guess what exactly I am thinking, right? So, all right, what is the cultural impact of apples on pizza for Italian? As you can see, it eventually gave up. It was far too hyper specific. So I guess you're wondering, Jen, what was the point of that again? What are you trying to demonstrate here? Well, in a way, that's how Gen AI thinks. It sees. So how does that work exactly? How does an autofill reflect Gen AI? There are two parts to that. The only reason why autofill works is because of our history of searches. And the way Google does it is that, oh, okay, based on the information you're going to give me one word at a time, I'm going to start guessing what's next, right? That's essentially how Gen AI works. That's how large language models work. Based on the information that it already has, I'm going to try to guess the meaning of your prompt and what exactly it is that you want. But as you noticed, it works perfectly well for simple things. But the more complicated your request is, the more it kind of fails. So the point here is that more information for Gen AI, the better. Because essentially, the more information you're giving it, the clearer your instructions are, the less guessing it's going to do. Whereas the more complex your request is, the lack of data there is, the more likely it's going to fail. So we're going back again to the relationship with data. Now, how does that work? Let's go back to the point here. How does that work with guessing? Because ultimately, Gen AI is really just guessing, right? So, that being said, you want to be mindful of these three concepts as you engage with AI moving forward. And this is really to minimize the negative impact of that guessing component. First and foremost is prompt engineering. How well are you instructing or communicating your task to Jenny? Because really, she's just guessing, you know? So, how well are you communicating your task and your expectations of output? The second is hallucinations. Being mindful that, Jenny could misinterpret your prompt, could misinterpret the data it has access to. That being said, could give you a confidently wrong answer. And when we say confidently wrong is because she's not going to tell you that this is her best guess. The way she's going to package that back to you is this is the answer. All right. But then the moment you correct her, she will say, oh, yeah, you're correct. Right. Because that's how it works. It's meant to agree with you, really. So, how are you going to spot when things are hallucinating and what makes hallucinations uh, happen? And finally, biases. Remember, Jenny sees reality based on whatever data she has access to. Data isn't normally complete or completely representative of reality. And I'll show you samples later on, right? Let's talk more about that later on. So let's move forward. Let's unpack these one by one, right? So first, prompting. People call it prompt engineering. I just want to tell it too fancy, really. It's writing a set of instructions, to be very honest. So the idea here is that whenever you're prompting Gen AI, the more information, the clearer your structure, the better. Now, I'll give you a very easy way to improve that quickly. We use something like a prompt formula. And when we say prompt formula, it's really just four sections of information that you want to remember that you should put into any prompt. In some cases you may not need all four, in some cases you may need all four. But really it's the P is for persona. What role is Jenny trying to play or what is your role in this context, right? It really just give Jenny a bit of background. Are you an employee? Are you an artist? Are you, say, the director, and so on? Because that's pretty important nuance. T is for task. Task is what exactly do you want Jenny to do? Do you want her to list information? Do you want her to give you one simple answer? And so on and so forth. F is for format, meaning how do you want that information packaged back to you? Do you want it in a spreadsheet? Do you want it as a blurb? Do you want it as a tweet? And finally, context. What are the other context notes or information that you can provide to help Jenny better understand where you're coming from? Maybe these are, say, for example, if you're asking her to write a blog, maybe you can give her a sample of your previous blog as a point of reference. That's also context. In other cases, I give her context such as, say, my persona here is, say, I'm a senior manager, I'm a consultant for nonprofits. The context is I'm dealing with, say, small to medium organizations in Myanmar who may not have the best English. So let's try to simplify our communications as much as possible. So these little bits and pieces or nuggets of information that can help Jenny improve her output and make it more usable for you. Those are very important. So that being said, as you write your prompts, particularly for more sophisticated or complex tasks, remember those four key concepts: persona, task, format, and context. And follow it as if you're filling out a sheet. You're filling out information and trying to fill that out as much as you can. That will get you to the best response, or at least the best first draft of that response sooner, right? Because you're really giving Jenny complete information. Second, if you're dealing with arbitrary concepts, try to define it for your Gen AI. For example, you're looking for, say, the best restaurant to have dinner tonight. What does best mean, right? Is it best in terms of uh, proximity to you? Is it best in terms of what cuisine, price range, and so on? Try to avoid arbitrary concepts because Jenny's interpretation of that may not align with how you're interpreting it. That being said, the best way to break down arbitrary concepts is maybe use clear criteria. Let's go back to that example of finding the best restaurant. Maybe you can break it down into three parts. Say, best meaning based on reviews in Google Maps, it should have, say, 4 stars or higher. Next part is that it should meet the following cuisine types. I don't like, say, Japanese, but I prefer Italian. You can provide that. And finally, best in terms of price range, maybe it should be within the $10 to $20 per head price range. So by breaking down and giving it clear criteria to work with, again, you're trying to communicate clearly what exactly is your expectation. And finally, share your process. A very common thing for us is that we may tend to overload our Gen AI prompts, meaning, for example, you'll give it as, say, a transcript of a meeting. And from that transcript of a meeting, you want it to get, so first, you want it to organize that transcript into, say, a bulleted list, get the tasks, uh, then finally something that is easy to email. Like give me a blurb of an email that can easily link to this summary. You may not be able to write that clearly when you're prompting because maybe you're giving all three at once. What you can do is you can break down that process. Say first, organize into a summary, follow a bulleted list. Based on this bulleted list, please isolate or organize tasks assigned to people based on the discussion. And finally, provide me with a blurb that can summarize this summary that I can send to an email, right? By breaking down your thought process for Gen AI, she's also able to follow your methods, the way you're gonna arrive at that output. This works well for multitask processes or essentially sophisticated requests, right? try to give it a step-by-step breakdown, and you can give that as part of your task if you're following the PTFC format. So first and foremost, one way to minimize or at least get the best output is by being very clear with your prompts. These are some of the three key steps that you can follow to give Jenny clear instructions and to get the best out of her and minimize that guessing component. Now, moving forward, in terms of outputs, it's also, again, very important to highlight Jenny has no inherent right or wrong. She can get things wrong. She can misinterpret in your prompts or misinterpret reality, or in some cases, just make things up. This is called hallucination, when I would refer to it as when she's confidently wrong, but will not tell you that she's wrong. In cases like this, be mindful that she's really just, guessing. Similar to autocorrect earlier, when you were typing the more complex question, the first guesses were completely wrong. In a way, Jenny could commit the same mistake. She's going to give you completely wrong outputs, and that could be based on a number of different reasons. The important component there is you being able to identify that, oh, yeah, that's wrong. That's the critical component. Now, what could probably cause that? A lack of context. It goes back to your prompt. Did you give Jenny enough information to kickstart that task? Did you give her enough context, enough, say, references to be able to meet your expectations? And finally, in some cases, it really just happens. For example, us humans, we do that similarly too. That's where a lot of folklore start, right? We saw rain, we had no understanding of weather systems, and we just guessed, oh, that's because of a turtle up in the sky. And for some reason, for hundreds of years, we believed that up until we learned the weather system. Gen AI could make things up just like that, and we have no clear reason how it got there, but it did. Uh, these are really common cases of hallucination. The intention here is that you being able to spot when it is hallucinating and correcting it. If it's still pursuing that it's correct, drop that chat, start a new chat, and try again. Because chances are you're going to get a different answer. And that's because Gen AI really isn't, formulaic in that sense. So the important part here is being mindful that, yeah, Gen AI could get things wrong. It's not perfect. It's based on data that we provided it. And it can also make things up in between. The important thing, again, I'm going to circle back, is that you being able to spot when it is actually hallucinating. And finally, bias. The critical component here is, again, Gen AI thrives on data. And sometimes data about reality isn't accurate, or maybe it's misrepresentative. Let's go back to the prior example. 10 people crossing the road, only one person uses the actual zebra crossing. 9 others don't. In that case, if you ask Gen AI, is it safe to cross the street without using the zebra crossing? He would say yes. That's fine because 9 out of 10 people did it. They're fine. And that's exactly where bias happens. In some cases, we may not have our data sets may not be clearly representative of reality. I'll give you another good example. Maybe you are hiring somebody, right? And out of your current data set, say only out of 10, say 9 were college graduates, but that missing one was actually the best person for the job. May not be a college graduate, but skills wise, that candidate has had all the experience from internships and whatnot. Now, because of the data that you have and maybe how your job description was written, your Gen AI companion might not even consider that best person because didn't meet the criteria based on whatever data you provided, right? Which is the job opening description and also that 9 out of 10 people had a college degree. That being said, the critical thing about bias is that review your data. Be mindful of where gaps exist. Be mindful of where there is bias, because that will be echoed by Gen AI, right? And finally, for more sophisticated or more analytical tasks, be mindful that reality isn't simple. You can't uh, go back to the pineapples on pizza. You can't ask Gen AI to give you the cultural implications of that and give it, say, a spreadsheet. Because, and ultimately, that's how it works, really, right? It's trying to see data in ones and zeros, but what you're asking is the cultural impact of something that's really not going to marry up. So just be mindful of what you're asking and whether what you're asking is appropriate considering what data it has access to. Because ultimately, it might give you a biased response, right? So that was a lot. And I know I want to save time for questions, but let's power through with a wrap up. That being said, ultimately, there is a role for you in this process. Jenny, your applicant, because she is applying, coming from that where we began, she's applying to be part of your organization. As amazing as she is, she may make mistakes. But that being said, does it mean that you have to micromanage her? Well, not necessarily. What's important here is to highlight where your role fits as you work with Gen AI. The first part is output checking. As you can see, she may give you biased responses or she may completely hallucinate. It is your role to vet that. Check the outputs you're getting and confirm whether that's appropriate or accurate. The second part, and this is the part that I think a lot of people miss, and this is, I think, where a lot of people forget. That's why it kind of like fuels fears about AI replacing them. Remember that AI isn't completely autonomous. You're part of that equation because you're giving it direction, you're giving it information, and you're there to vet the responses. That being said, outside of reviewing outputs, you're also there to actually set the direction of where you want AI to go. You're prompting it in the first place, right? But be mindful that there are now agents that are becoming more semi-autonomous, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it wasn't configured that way, but somebody. Still was some direction setting in that equation. That being said, it's just important to be mindful that there are things we call agentic or AI agents, which are more semi-autonomous in nature. We will explore samples of these later on in the series, particularly as we deal with the GEMS component of Gemini, right? But all in all, as we wrap up, as you've gone through like a library of tech jargon, it's really important to take away these key concepts. First, yes, Gen AI is multi-skilled and is able to develop output very, very fast. Clearly, it is a match made in heaven for us nonprofits who are struggling with capacity, struggling with deadlines almost on a daily basis, right? In fact, I'll show in the next session with ethics, we'll give you a bit of data as to how nonprofits have begun perceiving AI. But as good as it is, it can also be reckless. So be mindful when it's wrong. You should be there to manage the outputs, to review the outputs, particularly checking for hallucinations or biases. And finally, this is really just the beginning. The way we talked about AI at the moment is purely based on consumer AI, the typical Gen AI platforms that we would deal with, such as ChatGPT, Copilot, and so on. Their AI is now becoming more and more embedded within core functions of traditional apps in a way that it's less intentional for us to actually go there. Rather, they're now operating automatically in the background. A very good example is, say, how we're doing info searches now, or how Copilot is becoming more and more embedded within the Microsoft 365 environment, right? Not exactly dealing with Copilot directly, but rather Copilot powering, say, our Outlook teams and so on. So just that. There's a lot more to go from here. To wrap up, again, I just want to, and before as we head towards the Q&A, I want to highlight we offer a lot of resources to the APAC AI learning community. Artie is there, I am there, our partners in Info Exchange are there. Join us. So there are a lot of key components that we can offer. We can give you individualized learning paths after you take a persona test. If you're looking for more content, we offer free webinars and self-paced courses there. If you're interested with exploring AI adoption, we will deliver assessments for you to help create that important scaffolding to prepare your organization. Or if you have an idea, we can assess the feasibility of that idea and check whether it's ethical or not. And finally, if you really just need help, you can book consultations and trainings with us. It is 100% free to join. It's available in 5 languages. And really, what are you waiting for? You can join us there, right? That's about it for me, Artie. I think we can open it up to Q&A.
Sure, Jeff. Thank you so much for this lovely session. And I have requested, participants, if you have any questions, they can type it and we can take few live questions towards the end. So, okay, there is one question from Devashish. He said, instead of giving step-by-step directions to Jenny, as indicated, isn't it recommended to follow an iterative
Iterative
process?
process.
Yeah, with simple short prompts, transiting to more detailed ones, uh, maybe with an ask me questions as we go along, built in as part of the initial prompts.
Thanks, Artie. And that's a very good question as well, Debashis. So it is, yeah, that's pretty doable. In some cases, we're really not clear where the direction we're going, and it's more exploratory. So rather than forcing yourself to write a very clear, detailed prompt, and whereas you prefer to explore options or different angles, yes, an iterative process, an iterative chat where you give it feedback per output, that's also one way to go. Just be mindful of the context windows. The longer the chat goes, the more likely it's going to hallucinate. So try to keep it, while you're being iterative, try to keep it concise as well, because, like, say, 20 chats down the line, it may be answering an entirely different question already by then. So just be mindful of that. But the process itself, no issues. I do that a lot, particularly for creative outputs as well. So yeah, both are equally applicable. I'm
Thanks,
happy to
Jed.
for other questions
Moving.
if you have.
Yes, there is one from Rajneesh. He's asking, what are some popular applications of generative AI in the real world?
Applications meaning real world use cases. So if that's the question, Rajneesh, so I can give you a few ones. So for example, in my role, I deal with a lot of different languages. For example, I may be consulting with a Japanese or a Korean organization. Now, I speak neither language. And the other thing is that there are cultural norms with the way they communicate. You have to be a bit more formal and so on. So rather than a straightforward language interpreter, sorry, translator, it's more of an interpreter where I'm going to create an agent where if I give you this English response, translate that, but follow strict protocols for how you would normally respond in a corporate setting for, say, Japanese or Korean organizations. So that's one example. Another easy example is how we've streamlined our creative outputs. For example, if I need to manage the newsletters on top of social media, I can give it, say, one piece of content, say, take my blog. Now, out of this blog, generate multiple types of content for me. That's another example. These are examples of AI agents that you can easily actually build in, say, an hour or so, and we'll get there in the gem session later on. And that's another practical use for me. Say, we have that agent called the caption generator, where I'll give you a piece of content, and out of it, it will give me a tweet, a Facebook post, a LinkedIn post, and also a newsletter article. I'm not going to copy and paste it, but it's an easy way to springboard from that first draft to something more usable. And the way we did it is that we plugged the marketing guidelines so that it understands the tone of voice of TechSoup and so on. So I hope those are some that resonate with you. But if you're struggling to think of use cases, it's worth having a dialogue about, okay, where am I struggling individually or operationally as a team? And try to think of ways where AI could be plugged into that. For example, if you're having issues dealing with lots of data, another good example I would give you is with Gemini, for example. It's actually plugged into Google Forms and it gives you summaries per question, streamlining how you run through particularly qualitative data. So, some of the easy samples I could give.
Moving on, there is one more question, Jed,
Sure.
from Vasumati. She's saying, if we want to make a chatbot for our nonprofit's website, what are some simple starting points?
How to make chat of right now process. Ah, that's now it's up. I know that sounds simple, sounds like a simple question, Vasumati, but it's actually a question that has a lot of uh, considerations. For example, what are the kinds of queries you're dealing with? And the second part is, what information are you going to feed into that chatbot? Creating a chatbot in of itself is pretty easy, you know? If you're I know, for example, Copilot has that immediate agent that creates a chatbot based on a SharePoint site. I haven't tried it, but I heard it's pretty easy, so we can experiment with that. Another thing is if you're on Google, you can create a publicly accessible gem. But the question is, what information are you feeding into it? What information are you going to send back? And is there a lot of room for hallucination there? If you want to start, think about your database first. And when I say, sorry, not database, knowledge base, how have you organized your info that will then feed into that chatbot? So think about that. The second is, what kinds of questions will you allow it to answer? Meaning, what are questions that you would deem sensitive or would require manual intervention? So you would rather not have the chatbot answer it? That's another thing. And the third, naturally, is what tool are you using it? Are you using for that particular purpose? Are you using built-in AI companions within your larger environments, such as Google or Microsoft, or are you acquiring a third party? So it's a larger question. I would highly recommend you go do the assessment for that. It's 100% free in the APAC AI learning community. So we can evaluate your current infrastructure, then evaluate your use case to see how we're going to proceed that in the most safe and ethical way as possible. So I know that's a non-answer, Vasumati, but unpacking what are the other questions that you should be asking before you move towards the chatbot.
Um, we can go do some live questions. If anyone has
Yep.
questions, they can raise hands and can ask. They can
Don't
unmute and raise hands and unmute
don't
if
be
anyone
shy,
is free.
guys. We're
Yeah.
spending 8 sessions together. So like,
Yes.
don't be shy. Yes, Tappy.
Yes, Tapi, you can unmute and ask.
I think you're still on mute.
Yeah.
Yes.
There you go.
Hello.
Hi.
First of all, Jed, I wanted to congratulate you for making a more technical subject user friendly.
Thank you.
And thank you for that. Uh, I have a basic question.
Of
See,
course.
whenever my experience in using this ChatGPT or AI for some official work, somewhere when if the Jenny is not able to provide the data or the information that I want, I often get a comment that particular to your inquiry, we are unable to provide, but similar to what the situation may be, particularly if we want to know the socio-economic or the geographical situation. If I'm writing a, let us say, a project proposal for a specific geographical location, and if I put across that question, I've noticed two things. Whenever the Jenny is able to provide the data, automatically the web source is also provided so that
Mhm.
authenticity is protected. It says from where it has come. Secondly, whenever it is not able to provide, I clear cut sometimes get message that it is not the what your the pointed question or the pointed data that you are asking, we may not be able to answer, but relevant to that, nearer to your question, we can provide the information. That is what, when particularly when you talked about that Jenny can make mistakes and it can give out of, so I think for a basic learner, for me, started using AI, is you need to provide a correct complex data to AI and avoid the complex questions so that you can get a correct
Ah,
information. Is
that's a
that
good.
so? Is that so?
That's a good one. Yeah. So let's use your context here and let's do a bit of a recap. So you're writing, say, for example, a grant application or a research paper, right? And in some cases, it could give you information that you can digest as a reference. In some cases, it will explicitly tell you, well, I don't have that information, but here's kind of like relevant stuff. Now, the question was, is this common where for more complex situations, it really just fails, right? It
Yes.
it's hard to give you a blanket answer because the reality is Gen AI is very its performance is a bit of a variable. What do I say a variable? When I tell Gen AI right now to write me a tweet about say the socioeconomic situation in the Philippines, it's not going to be the exact same output when I ask it again, say next Tuesday, because it's a variable. In your case, have you tried rerunning that with some certain changes? For example, maybe making minor changes to your prompt, maybe feeding it with data attachments that it could use as a basic sense of reference, or maybe changing it to rather than giving me say a draft of a proposal, find me information first, then similar to the question earlier, turning it into an iterative process, right? Like the first prompt would be say, find me information related to say uh, the opportunity costs in say labor force and so on and so forth in India, right? So first one would be finding information. Second would be now condense this information for me, like give me the top 5 highlights, say from 2020 to 2026. So this is where the example earlier of being more iterative comes into place rather than having a full-blown complex prompt because you're not sure as well where you're heading. It's more of an exploratory conversation. Outside of that, some other minor, more technical recommendations I could provide. Uh, Play around with the thought model. When I say thought model, it's your so for example, I'll show you a sample of that, say in Gemini. Now, all Gen AI platforms have this, and it's the thought model. So here, let's wait for that. So as you can see here, it's either Thinking Fast or Pro. ChatGPT would have its own list, and so as Copilot and Claude. You can test with higher levels of thinking models. So, and it may arrive at a better response because what you're really determining here is how much do you want Gen AI to spend time on your task? It's no different to when your boss tells you, like, hey, Judd, I need a summary of this meeting, but don't spend 5 minutes, don't spend more than 5 minutes on it. Or I need a very thorough review of this for the board, make sure to spend say 2 hours on it. The outputs would vary differently, and this is the equivalent of the thought model here. How much time do you want it to spend and focus on it? So just to recap some key recommendations, it's not that Gen AI fails on more complex tasks. Maybe it's more about how do you want to revisit that approach. Maybe you want to turn it into a more iterative conversation, starting with data gathering first and building from there. Or maybe try to play around with your thought models. So just those two, my 2 cents. It's a bit hard because it's a case to case basis.
Thank you.
No worries. All right, I think we have
Um,
2 minutes left, so maybe
yeah.
one quick question.
Yes. If anyone,
I'm tempted to ask one more question.
Go for
Uh,
it.
since 1 minute is left. Uh, when we record, let us say, a particular meeting minutes discussions on a mobile phone, cell phone, and if they are same translated or transcribed to the as a part of the regular minutes of the meeting,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I have found that whatever are the important discussions that has taken place during the meeting may not necessarily reflect. It gives you a better shape. It gives you a better shape starting from point number one, welcome, agenda, everything. It gives you systematized minutes, but it may lack some important discussion that may have taken place in the meeting. in spite of the fact that word to word discussions have been recorded. So, how to address and resolve that?
That's a very good question, and it's an interplay between what tool are you using, what subscription is that on, and what are you doing with the output. Typically, if you're really just dealing with the automated uh, kind of like the auto feedback, like, the automatic output, no configurations whatsoever, then your companion may not be completely understanding, okay, what's important in this discussion, and that's what I'm going to take into consideration, right? That's where the what we call training component comes into place. It's really, when we say training, it's really just giving it more insights. What I could recommend is, if you're getting a synthesized version and it's inaccurate consistently, then if you can turn off that synthesis, turn it off. Rather, get the raw transcript, write a new agent. Stubby, may I ask, are you using Microsoft or Google?
Microsoft.
Microsoft, for example. For example, Microsoft automatically gives you a synthesis, right, in Teams. So maybe disregard that synthesis if you can't turn it off. Take the raw transcript, write a different agent with a clear understanding of what are the important points for you, how do you want that information packaged, and most importantly, maybe write an agent that can consider your agenda for that day. So what you will do is, every time you run that agent, here is my agenda, here is my transcript. Please organize me a summary that takes into account these two components. Because sometimes the automated output, it's really not the best, really, because it has no understanding of what are the key points of your topic, what is your agenda. It's really just guessing, Much like, for example, if I'm a new hire and you ask me to, Jed, write the minutes of the meeting, I'm probably gonna get 90% of that wrong. Because I don't know who's what and what exactly is this project and what is the
Yes.
delay and so on. So
Yes.
that's kind of like the real world equivalent of that. So write an agent instead. If you feel intimidated by writing an agent and you're in Microsoft, don't worry. Microsoft, when you write an agent in Microsoft, there's a part there where you can just describe what you want the agent to do. Copilot will prepare those sets of instructions for you. You can review it, make some tweaks, but the majority of the work done. So you can approach it that way.
So the last one that you mentioned, that it does the agentic job, the agent job. We have
The
to make
agent
use
job,
of that. Yes, agent.
yes.
Oh,
Uh,
oh,
it's going to be part of the series. Now, while we're discussing it within the Google context, it's a universal principle, and you can apply that same practices in Copilot. So no issues there. And also, I'm in Microsoft as well. So I could quickly pivot to, hey, here's my Copilot, here's how it works. So yeah, I hope that helps. And I know we're 3 minutes over
yes.
time. Artie, sorry about that.
No problem, Jed, no problem. I am happy to have good questions here. But
These are
yeah,
all practical challenges that we face. So it's better to
And
ask
I
the
love those.
expert.
Yeah, I love those questions because we're not thinking about theory anymore. Let's what exactly matters. That's what's more important.
sure. Thank you, Sapi. Thank you for the questions. Yeah, I think, yes, we can conclude the session. Thank you so much, Jed.